Today I want to share 15 personal favourite songs from 1982, 1983 and 1984. I have already covered the years 1980 and 1981 extensively on this channel, through documentaries and previous music lists. Those early years remain some of my favourites because of their creativity, experimentation and sense of discovery. But by 1982, 1983 and 1984, many of these artists were evolving, refining their sound and reaching increasingly mainstream audiences. These are not necessarily the biggest hits from those years. They are simply 15 songs that continue to mean something to me and that I still return to today. As always, these are simply my personal choices. Let's begin in 1982. I wanted to begin with Spandau Ballet's Chant No. 1. While many people now associate the band with polished pop and huge chart success, this track still feels connected to the energy and ambition of the new romantic movement that helped launch them. The influence of funk is impossible to miss, and the addition of Beggar & Co.'s brass section gave the song a confidence and scale that hinted at where the decade was heading. Yet there is still something adventurous about it. It sounds like a band pushing forward rather than settling into a formula. Next comes Living on the Ceiling by Blancmange. For me, this remains one of the most distinctive songs of the era. By 1982, synthpop was becoming increasingly visible in the charts, yet Blancmange still sounded wonderfully unconventional. The Eastern influences, the unusual arrangement, and Neil Arthur's instantly recognizable vocal combined to create something that felt both accessible and strange. It was a reminder that some of the most successful records of the period were often the ones willing to sound a little different. Gary Numan's This Is My House represents another side of 1982 and also has a personal connection for me. During my final year in public school, I spent a week working at a local television, radio and record store. As a thank you, the owner allowed me to choose 2 albums. I picked Roxy Music's Flesh and Blood and Gary Numan's I, Assassin, largely because I loved the cover artwork. That album became my introduction to Numan and eventually led me to discover his earlier work. This Is My House combines atmospheric electronics with the extraordinary fretless bass playing of Pino Palladino, whose fluid and melodic style became one of the defining sounds of the album. The contrast between Numan's detached vocal delivery and Palladino's expressive bass lines gives the track a unique character that still sounds fresh today. The song Talk Talk by the band of the same name captures a group still finding its identity. There are obvious links to the synthpop movement of the time, but even here you can hear hints of the direction they would eventually take. The energy is youthful, the hook is memorable, and the production sits comfortably alongside many of the electronic records that were filling clubs and radio playlists in 1982. The final song from 1982 is Classix Nouveau's Is It a Dream? Few records capture the atmosphere of the period quite like this one. Sal Solo's dramatic vocal performance, the sweeping synthesizers, and the sense of romantic melancholy make it feel like a perfect snapshot of the new romantic era at its most elegant. It closes my selection for 1982 because it represents so much of what made this period special. Ambitious, emotional, and completely unafraid to be different. Moving into 1983, this was the point where many of these artists were reaching larger audiences and becoming part of the musical mainstream. Yet much of the originality, ambition and spirit that had defined the movement during its earlier years was still intact. Few records symbolize that better than New Order's Blue Monday. It remains one of the most influential singles ever released and still sounds remarkably modern. Built around drum machines, sequencers and electronic rhythms, it brought underground club culture into the mainstream in a way that changed the direction of popular music. By the time I was in high school in the mid-1980s, many of these records were already a few years old. Living north of Copenhagen, Swedish radio became one of my gateways into this music. It often seemed far more aware of what was happening in the UK than Danish radio at the time, and through those broadcasts I discovered some of the artists featured in this video. OMD's Telegraph takes a very different approach. Where Blue Monday feels mechanical and hypnotic, Telegraph is filled with movement and urgency. Coming from the ambitious and often misunderstood Dazzle Ships album, it demonstrates how OMD continued to push creative boundaries while still writing compelling pop songs. Tears for Fears Change feels like a turning point. The band emerged from the post-punk environment that had shaped much of the early 80s, but there was a growing confidence in their songwriting that pointed towards bigger things ahead. The combination of emotional depth, strong melodies, and sophisticated production would become one of the defining characteristics of their work. Around the same time, a group of friends and I became obsessed with discovering more of this music. We joined a British mail order company that sent out catalogues filled with both new releases and artist-backed catalogues. We pooled our orders together to save on postage and spent hours deciding what to buy. Yazoo's Sweet Thing comes from the duo's final album, You and Me Both. For me, it highlights everything that made the partnership between Vince Clarke and Alison Moyet so special. Clarke's electronic arrangements provided the framework, but it was Moyet's extraordinary voice that gave the music its emotional power. The result is a song that feels intimate, warm and timeless.
Just go, 'cause nothing now can keep this a good thing.
Closing 1983 is Soft Cell's Where the Heart Is. While the band are often remembered for their biggest hits, there was always a darker and more reflective side to their music. This song captures that perfectly. There is a sense of vulnerability running through it, supported by atmospheric production that creates an almost cinematic mood.
Mother loves to be concerned, using lessons that she learned. Fathers never understand when children have the other.
By 1984, the transformation was becoming increasingly clear. Many artists who had emerged from underground clubs, independent labels and alternative scenes were now major mainstream figures. The production was cleaner, the songwriting more direct, and the commercial ambitions often greater. That does not mean the music became less interesting, but it was certainly different from the more experimental spirit that had characterized so much of the 1980-1981 period. Howard Jones opens my 1984 selection with What Is Love? Looking back, it is easy to forget how fresh he sounded when he first appeared. The song combines thoughtful lyrics with an infectious melody and a bright electronic production that perfectly captured the optimism of the period. Fiction Factory's Feels Like Heaven remains one of the great synthpop songs of the mid-80s. The soaring chorus, the emotional delivery and the shimmering production combine to create a record that still sounds uplifting today. It may have been their only major hit, but it secured their place in the story of the era.
Close for comfort now, we can recall a harmony that lingered but turned sour. Feels like heaven.
The More You Live, The More You Love by A Flock of Seagulls reveals a more mature side of a band often associated with their early image. The song is atmospheric, melodic and surprisingly reflective. Beneath the polished production there is a strong emotional core that rewards repeated listening.
The more you live, the more you love. What do they say? The more you love, the more you glory. They say that nothing lasts forever.
Depeche Mode's Lie to Me comes from Some Great Reward, the album that marked another important step in the band's evolution. While many listeners focus on the bigger singles, this track highlights the darker and more sophisticated direction they were beginning to explore. Martin Gore's songwriting had become more confident and emotionally complex, and the band's production was reaching new levels of depth and detail.
Come on and lay with me. Come on and lie to me. Tell me you love me. Say I'm the only one. Come on and lay with me. Come on and lie to me. Tell me you love me. Say I'm the only one.
The final song in my selection is Ultravox's White China. By 1984, the band had already established themselves as one of the defining groups of the era, and this track demonstrates why. There is a cinematic quality to the arrangement, combining electronic textures with a sense of drama that few bands could match. It feels like an ideal way to close this journey through 1982 to 1984. Looking back, these 15 songs capture a fascinating stage in the evolution of new wave, synthpop, and the new romantic movement. The pioneering and experimental spirit of the early years was still visible, but the music was becoming more polished, more accessible, and increasingly mainstream. Personally, I will probably always have a special affection for the creativity and sense of discovery that defined 1980 and 1981. But that should not take anything away from the music that followed. Many of these songs remain among my favourites from the entire era, and they remind me just how strong and diverse the scene remained as it moved through the middle years of the decade.